Hello, everyone. This is Arthur Robinson Jr. I am the creator of PowerfulInterviews.com. In this exclusive interview, you're going to hear from a great friend of mine. His name is David Morgan, and he specializes in the gold and silver markets. And I highly recommend, if you want to hear this life-changing, powerful interview that you won't find anywhere else on the planet, go to www.powerfulinterviews.com. In this exclusive interview that I'm going to reveal to you, you're going to hear some life-changing, powerful information in regards to the precious metal sector that you won't find anywhere else. So check it out.
Good evening, everyone. This is Arthur Robinson Jr., and tonight I have a special treat just for you. I have a wonderful person on the call. He's a great friend of mine. His name is David Morgan, and he's a precious metals expert. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome David Morgan to the call.
It's great to be with you, and I'm sure that I'll do my very best to educate your listeners about precious metals, why they're important probably now more than ever. I'll probably talk about some of the history behind the metals and also how the economy's going and why the metals are so vital in today's economy.
So what I would like to know, and can you educate the listeners about who you are and what do you suggest in terms of how can the listeners take advantage of the precious metal sector?
Well, it started a long time ago for me. I'm past 50 right now, and actually what got me interested in the silver market or in precious metals was as an 11-year-old kid, I was receiving 25 cents a week from my dad for watering our orchard. And I don't know what it took. You know, when you're 11, an hour seems like a long period of time. Probably took a couple hours. And anyway, we were pretty far in the country, and there really wasn't any place to spend those quarters. So I just saved them and just, took them out of my piggy bank once in a while, looked at them. But this day came along like no other day, and this day I got a quarter from my dad, and it was noticeably different. It was a cupro nickel, what I've referred to since as the Johnson slugs. And this was a coin that has absolutely no silver in it whatsoever. It was copper and nickel, and it was plated, so it looked silver in color, but it had no real intrinsic value. I mean, copper's got some intrinsic value, but very little. Certainly not a quarter's worth of value. So that kind of startled me, even as a kid. I thought, geez, this doesn't seem right, and I certainly can't be equal. But yet, it seemed that nobody was paying attention to that. And that question about why did this happen and what does it mean kind of stuck with me for quite some time. And then when I got into grade school, I started exploring it more under, what the Constitution says about lawful money and that, it should be gold and silver and that type of thing. So it was a kind of a quest that started at a very early age that I pursued basically my whole life. And I found things that were very startling to me about how the system works. So I pursued that. Started reading about the monetary system, and it was rather startling to find out that the basics of our system are what's called a fiat system. And I use that word very often, but a lot of people don't know what it means. The word fiat actually means by mandate or by government decree. I like to think as a joke, but true, like the Kunakinte story where King Kunakinte goes out to the ocean and commands the waves to stop. He's issuing fiat to nature, and of course nature doesn't pay any attention to him. But in our world, in the world of money and finance, as long as you can get the people to believe that a piece of paper has value and you con enough people, then it does. And that's the situation that we're in. And this situation that we're in right now is very, very tenuous because they always fail. China was one of the first to start on a paper or a fiat money system, and this is one of the great inventions that the world traveler Marco Polo discovered when he went to China. Of course, he saw tons of interesting things and people and art, and items he'd never even experienced or thought of before when he traveled to China. But when the one that impressed him the most, or among the most, was that they were using paper to do transactions. And when he came back to Europe, he brought that knowledge with him. And so then you started to see paper currency starting to be used in place of physical gold and silver. And the funny thing about China, if you will, is China's probably done the paper money experiment more than any other nation. They've done it 8 or 9 times, and it's failed 8 or 9 times. In other words, every time they've gone on a paper system or a fiat system where the edict from government is that it has value, and the truth is it does not, the system has failed. And when these systems fail, they bring a great deal of heartache to the citizenry, because, you know, one day you're believing that this paper has value and will purchase something you need now or in the future, and then the next day it's basically worthless. And now what do you have? Nothing. All your savings dries up overnight. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen overnight here, although I wouldn't say that it couldn't. But we usually get the slow loss of purchasing power, which we have, and we've seen for quite some time.
Now, you mentioned the Chinese currency. Are you referring to the yuan?
Well, I'm talking all currencies now, including the yuan, or renminbi as it's also called, are fiat currencies. There's not a currency in the world anywhere that is backed by silver or gold or has any intrinsic value or any backing. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. And if you look at my website, I wrote an article called dollar.com pointing out this problem. And what has concerned me the most when I started, really getting into this study was that this is the first time in recorded history that it's a worldwide phenomena. And what that means is that this time around, you have no escape valve. In other words, as bad as it was during the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation, you still had the opportunity to go off to Austria or France or Spain, or you could have escaped the country and escaped the problem. And some people did, not many, but some. But this time around, the reserve currency of the world is the United States dollar, which means that China has about $1.7 trillion in the United States dollars, and Japan has lots, and all the countries, all the banking systems worldwide use the dollar as their reserve. So if the dollar goes down, they all go down. And that is what caused me so much fear, actually, is that this time around we're in a situation where it's not going to be a United States only problem, it's going to be a worldwide problem, and it's probably going to happen at the same time because, as I said, as the dollar goes, so goes everybody else.
So the U.S. dollar is toxic right now?
Well, yes, and it didn't start that way. I mean, the dollar is basically, I don't know if toxic is the right word. It's not a bad word. You could call it that. I mean, there's a couple things I want to point out. One is, how do we get on a dollar reserve system? I think that's important for our listeners. And one thing that we know is how it happened, and how it happened was very simple. After World War II, the nations of the world got together in a meeting at Bretton Woods, and during this meeting, they determined that the U.S. dollar would be the reserve currency of the world, and the reason that the U.S. dollar would be the reserve currency of the world was that the dollar was as good as gold. The U.S. dollar and gold were convertible at $35 the ounce. And because of that, the other nations said, owning the dollar is as good as gold. In fact, I'm old enough, and Arthur, you're probably not, but when I was young, there used to be an expression that was as sound as a dollar or good as gold. Either one of those expressions was the essence that a dollar was as good as gold, and that nothing could be sounder than a dollar. And the reason a dollar was so sound was because it was backed by gold. And we actually had that payment system on an international basis from the time that Roosevelt made it illegal for Americans to own gold. That was internal in the U.S., but externally all settlement was done by dollars.